Teak decks, probably the classiest thing a yacht can have on her top side. Not just classy, really, really practical. We'll go into why they're really great, but they do have a limited life. The life is pretty long, but it is limited, and you're going to have to know how to do maintenance. I know when I bought Temptress, I was terrified of even thinking of messing with these deck boards. It turns out it's really not very hard to do. So in this video, I'm going to tear off some bad deck boards, put some new ones on, and tell you the whole process of what's involved in updating your teak decks. Temptress is over 50 years old, and she hasn't been sitting around at a marina an awful lot. She's been out and used with stuff scraped over her decks, and we've stored dinghies on the deck and drag them around. Her decks have been really used over this time, and they look pretty rough. I would hire this because of the amount of work involved. But I could take her in and have the deck stripped down, the glass under brought up to total perfection, and a new teak deck put on. But that's a lot of money. And honestly, that's not why I like the teak decks. It's not about looking like this yachty yacht. It's because they're really great underfoot. When you're at sea and all hell's breaking loose, I find they have great traction. I don't really worry about slipping around. Other boats I do. They're also, you would think it would make no difference, but they're significantly more comfortable to sit on and kneel on than non-skid on fiberglass. It is harder than wood, and you can tell when you sit on it. I think it keeps the boat cooler. In fact, when it's really super hot, I have actually sprayed water on the decks, and they'll absorb a little bit of water, of course, being wood, and then they'll evaporate that water. I do it kind of in the evenings, and that will cool the boat inside noticeably. Don't do it a lot because it's kind of more effort than it's worth, but really it's just take the wash down pump and give it a spray. Of course, now we use air conditioning, solar powered, so not even an issue. All right, so Temptress's teak decks are really giving up, and I have made the owner's decision to make them function. And I'm not trying to make them perfect, though the same process I'm going to talk about today can be used to make them perfect. I'm replacing the very worst of the decks, and as you can see, I'm a few years behind, making it like a mosaic of teak. So it's still wood everywhere, that's well bonded, hooked to the surface, in good shape. Today, I'm going to go through tearing up some of the deck in a place that's particularly bothersome. There's actually a leak there caused by some fasteners that have been added after Temptress was built, before I bought her. And we're going to tear it down, we're going to repair all that damage, and then we're going to put new teak deck boards in. I'm going to show you the tricks for being able to make the curves and all of that. Probably the place to start in this talk would be how to get the teak in the first place. Last thing you want to do is buy laths of teak. This is a teak decking board. I know it's gray and you're probably used to them looking golden. I actually store this in the sun, so it will be gray when I put it in. The sun tends to take a lot of the oils out of the surface of the wood, and I find that the glues that I'm using stick a lot better when the stuff has already been exposed to the sun for quite a while. And you know, we know what it's going to look like anyway, so this is the right thing to do. But if you find teak like this, it's going to be prohibitively expensive. If you search around, most all cities have this. You're going to find someone selling really good quality woods. This is where you're going to find mahoganies and teaks and silver bollies and all of these woods that, well, let's just say Lowe's does not carry. The place I go in Orlando, it refers to it, we sell the most expensive firewood in the world. Anyway, you go there, you want to look through their stuff, and usually they're okay with you looking through their stuff, because since you're going to be cutting it down so much, a knot or bad grain would be really a problem for you. And you're going to buy a large piece of wood. That large piece of wood is, you know, big. I think the last one I bought was 8 inches by about 4 or 5 inches, maybe even 6. I don't really remember. It was big. If I can find the footage, I'll show you me cutting it down. I have a piece here that I got locally. It's a very interesting piece. I think it actually started its life, strangely enough, as a railroad tie. Um, they used whatever they had that was durable in Asia for railroad, and of course now teak is so expensive. I understand they're taking up old railroad ties, putting like concrete railroad ties or whatever modern equivalent is, cutting the outside surfaces off and then selling that as teak lumber. Anyway, that's what I believe this beam is. I don't know what I'm going to do with this beam yet. I might use it for chocks to hold the dinghy up. I think I will, but I could do the same process I'm about to describe. Anyway, you want to cut it and you want to measure your teak boards. Decide on the thickness. They're going to be thinner than they were when they were installed, of course. You probably don't want them the full height they were when installed because the new boards would step up too much. But you probably want them a little thicker than what you're replacing because, you know, why not? Get those measurements and then you're going to cut them. To cut anything in wood, you're going to have to deal with something called a kerf. When the saw goes through, the saw's blade has some thickness to it, and that's just wasted wood. Now, if you're just going to cut one cut, you don't even care, but you're going to be slicing thin pieces out of this wood. So the kerf is going to make like 2 or 3 deck boards of loss. And the teak is not particularly cheap. It's going to shock you when you buy the beam, but you're going to get a lot of boards out of it. So it's not as bad as you might think. So what I did, what I wanted to do was find a bandsaw. I thought doing this on a bandsaw would be great because that would be the minimum kerf and that would be a great way to cut the wood. Couldn't find any friend with a bandsaw, but I have a friend that had an industrial table saw. I went out and I bought the thinnest kerfed circular blade I could find, and I put it on his table saw and did all my cutting with that. And I don't think I wasted that much wood. It was a worthy trade-off. And a table saw, of course, is way faster than a bandsaw, and it's really, really good at doing exactly the kind of cuts that need to be done. Now you're going to think ahead a little bit. You're going to schedule your cuts so that it comes out the way you want. And also importantly, you want to get the grain right. Obviously the grain goes the length of the teak. Let's look on the edge. This isn't perfect, but the grain is going up and down. You certainly do not want the grain going across the wood. It'll split and pieces of the wood could come off that way. But when the grain is going in this direction and this direction, you're going to be good. That's what you're after, and keep that in mind. Okay, now you're going to be the proud owner of a whole lot of very sweet smelling wood. I like to, like I said, put it in the sun for a while, let it cook, let it get gray as the decks would be, and then you're going to have to prepare the deck. Now there's a couple ways your existing teak could be connected to the deck. The most common way is it's actually screwed down, and that's the worst way. That's the way that'll cause you the most fits later. And on the other hand, it is easily the easiest way. So if your deck is screwed down, it probably is also glued a bit. You're going to find that there are holes drilled through the deck with a countersink and a wooden plug over the screw hole. You would want to drill out or chisel out that wooden plug, remove the screw, and then pull up the deck board, and we'll get into detail on that. The problem with a screwed down deck is there's a lot of holes in your actual yacht's deck underneath it. And holes are problems. Holes tend to eventually let water in. Water causes rot. The other way teak decks can be put down is to be glued down. And gluing down is the best. It's why I don't have any deck problems with Temptress. Temptress is a glued down deck. The glue is more likely to come loose. You're probably going to have to do more maintenance on a glued down deck. And a glued down deck is just plain harder to get the curves. These teak decks are not straight. They would look funny because a boat is a curved, elegant structure. And if you just had straight boards on it, it would just look awkward, like striped pajamas or something. So you're trying to bend the boards in this curve, and to do this with glue, of course, you've got to clamp them in some way. There's just nothing to clamp to. We'll get into that in detail in a while, but you gotta always think about clamping if you're doing a glued down deck. So you're gonna work in small sections. When you're working with a screwed down deck, you just kind of bend the board the way you want it, drill the hole, screw it down, you're done. Under the teak decking, you're going to have the yacht's proper deck. And that's going to be made in different ways on different boats. Most modern boats are just glass. They were like done in a mold, and there you go. They'll be cored with something, and it could be balsa, it could be foam. Some boats don't have a core. Usually decks have cores because you don't want this weight up high. This is going to be your highest big piece of structure on the whole boat. Again, when you have a screw, you got to watch what's in the core. You might have to do some repair if there's water in there, get it out and get it sealed up again. And that might mean actually cutting the glass out. But once the teak decks are up, cutting the top glass is not really a problem. Get everything the way you want it inside, then just rebuild the fiberglass deck. Fiberglass is really easy to work with later. And the best part about that is if you're going to put teak back over it again, you just have to make it flat. You don't have to make it pretty because you're going to cover it all up with wood. Temptress is made differently. She has a plywood deck, and then they laid fiberglass over the plywood deck. So she's very waterproof because of the fiberglass, but the structure is from the curved sheet of plywood, or many sheets of plywood that make her up. And because she has glued down teak, I don't have water incursion problems. But I have old teak. So let's dig into this. I found a section of the boat here that had some large bolts put right through the teak deck. The reason they did that is after they built this boat, they decided apparently this section through the middle wasn't sturdy enough, probably had too much flex. So they've added another 3/4 inch of structure underneath, and they had to bolt all that together. They'd already apparently laid the teak decks, so they drilled holes, put in these large bolts, brought it all together the way that you would want to, and then just capped the holes over. As the teak decks have gotten thinner over the years, the caps have come loose, and water has a passage to get down those bolt holes. And I've had issues inside because of it. So I've taken off, in this case, just 2 deck boards that are right in the area where there were a couple of those bolts. So I take them off with mostly a hammer and chisel. I just chisel away until I get all the teak and glue off the fiberglass, clean it up, vacuum it nicely. And then in the case of these, I drove the screws all the way down, sealed them really well, made them all nice and tight on the bottom. And I laid glass over top of the bolt. So now, again, absolutely waterproof. And that brings us to this point. We now have the teak decks prepped and ready for new teak, and we're going to replace these 2 boards. There's quite a curve in this part of the deck, so we're going to have to deal with that. And this will be a good little model of how to do this job. Let me move the camera so you can see what's going on just a little better. Okay, well, let's start with cutting some new deck pieces. I've got my beam here of teak, and we're going to have to place it right here. I've done some, there's an outline piece around the house that provides a nice seal, and this gives us an angle. So the first thing we have to do is cut that angle. Wood being wood, I can make marks on it very easily just by pressing a tool into it. Make a little mark there, and that gives me the angle to cut. And I use a couple tools. I've really been using lately a battery-powered vibrating tool, multi-tool, whatever they call these things that kind of do this. It's great, particularly for the boards that are already on the deck. But for just cutting a nice straight line in fine wood, there's nothing better than a hacksaw. Leaves a nice clean edge and easy enough to work with. Okay, that piece of wood is going to go from there to here. Again, I'll make some marks for where it ends. You want the board to fit in the space. You want it to cover up the space, but you don't want it tight. If it's tight, wood is kind of alive, you know? When it gets wet, it swells a bit. And the last thing you want is the two boards to kind of do that. So leave a little space between them. Yep. Okay, that board will end up being there. Now let's do the longer board. Same thing. When you cut with a hacksaw, cut from the top down. Diagonal is just fine, but at least at the end or at some point, cut all the way across. When wood cuts, you know, at the end, if you're applying pressure, it can split a bit. It's way better to have those splits on the bottom. Now this, being a longer board, has quite a curve to it. And you've got to kind of imagine the curve while you're doing the cut. Make sure you get the right length. Okay. Okay, those are going to look good. Now, it's good to get everything set up before you dive in because, well, you know, glue's coming. So what you're going to do is place your boards. And this board, I'm not going to worry about the curve too terribly much. Just going to put it in there. It's a short board. It would be nice if it had a little curve forced into it. Maybe it will, the way I end up clamping. This board really is going to need some attention. If you look at how it fits in its hole, this is how it would like to be, and we've got to bend it all the way to there, and that's quite a bit. This is the reason why I didn't tear out a whole section of deck and just fix it. It would be easier, but, you know, we need to have something to clamp against. So we're using the existing teak decks, even if they're in bad shape, to hold the new ones down, and then we can use the new one to replace the ones that are near it. Place it where we want it to be, and then we're going to bend it. And of course, it's going to want to warp and jump. So we need to have a clamping force, and that's the limit in this. The up and down clamping force we're going to do with gravity. I have lead bricks. Some of these were part of Temptress's movable ballast. Some of these are, like this one, I bought a bunch of lead and cast a brick out of like a pie tin or a loaf pan. Anyway, put 25 pounds of lead on the end of it, and it generally wants to stay where you put it. So it's in, it's bent generally how I want it. It didn't pose that much of a fight, but if it did pose a lot of fight for you or you want it to be a little easier, you could leave it at this stage for a few days, maybe even get it wet. Definitely let it rain on it, and that piece of teak will just kind of naturally start to take that bend. It'll make life easier, but I'm going to force this one. And what I found works the best is coins. These are just coins from all over the world that I've been just collecting, you know, in your coin drawer because you take it out of your pockets. The way the wood's going to curve, it's going to be tight at one end and then tight in the middle and back tight at the other end. And that's just going to look funny. You want a real equal space, either for caulk or not caulk, that's up to you. So what we're going to do is open up these gaps and make them the way we want them to be. I find that the chisel I used earlier, it's got a nice angle to it, and it will open the gap right up very nicely, and then I just shove coins in until I get what I'm looking for. So let's take some time to do some spacing here before the glue. Okay, I think that will do pretty well. It's a little tight here because this angle, it's touching in this area too hard. So I'm gonna trim that wood just a little bit, probably just go get my jackknife and do it. And then that'll let that wood kind of go up a little bit. But this is how I want it. So I'm gonna now pull out the coins and lay them where I want them to be. Again, like I said, I'll quickly trim that wood and then I'm gonna glue it down. Now, I've been using some Sikaflex products that I like in big tubes, but, well, I'm about to leave the boat for quite a while. I don't want to open a big tube of caulk. So I'm going to use this today, Life Caulk. It looks like it should be sticky enough to do the job. There's a lot of surface area, so this should work out pretty well. In going down to get my knife, I found this file. I think that might be better idea for that piece of wood. So I'm going to trim it with the file. Here we go. Whoa. Other things I've used as glue, I've used 5200, but don't use that. It takes forever to harden up. You need to leave the clamps on just forever. And, you know, it's not cheap. For a while, I was using a Loctite product that you can buy in the hardware store. It's polyurethane, I believe. It's that stuff that foams up a little bit. Same stuff as Gorilla Glue in a tube. And for many years, I thought it was great, but it kind of let go. You know, it didn't last as long as I had hoped. I've been having really good luck with, I think it's called 941, but whatever the most adhesive version of well, any kind of adhesive sealant for marine use is great. Now, I always use black because it looks better when it comes up between the boards. And I just use a lot of black caulk on Temptress because she's not a fiberglass boat. Okay, there's one. Make absolutely sure you put the glue on the right side. I've done that before. Sometimes the board's symmetrical, you can just flip it over, but these have angles on them, so this would be a bad day. Now, most of these caulks are a messy thing, of course. Be very careful not to get them where you don't want them. They refer to them as Black Death because you'll get marks all over your boat. Now, if you do get them on you or on something that you'd rather take them off, I find that most of them can be cleaned up with rubbing alcohol. So I'd go to that first. I know 5200 is really easily cleaned up with isopropyl alcohol. I often, tape up to make sure I don't get them where I don't want them. But I've been less worried about that in more, like when you're working around fiberglass, because with isopropyl alcohol and paper towels, you can wipe it up really well. Kind of makes it like you're working with silicone. Make sure there's nothing in the hole. Any little hunk of glue or wood is going to be a high spot, and you don't want that. I did a lot of shop vacuuming on this, but it's been a day or two. And you really don't want to get the glue on the good teak deck. And that poses more of a problem when you put the spring into it. So getting that lead right in place is a good idea. So let's put our spacers back in. Now if you did get a little bit of glue on the top, that's just sweat from my hand, and it bothers you, remember it's wood, you can sand it right off. You put it on, you can take it off. You just made the decks thicker. How these decks fail is they kind of get loved to death. If you want your teak decks to look absolutely gorgeous, and I've done this in the past, though I really kind of wish I wouldn't have, you can sand them all down and put a product on it. What was that product I used to love? Semco. And oh my God, did this boat look good back then. It just looked beautiful. But in sanding the decks down and doing an acid wash and all the things you do to put the Semco on, I probably took like 10 years right off the top of its life. So you decide, it's your boat. You want it to look good for 50 years and you plan on owning it forever and you don't want to work on it, be nice to the decks. If you want it to look like a fashion statement and then sell the boat and buy another boat or whatever, or you're already 70, then don't worry about it. Enjoy the boat. Do what you want. Well, there we go. 2 teak deck boards replaced. It's not going to look perfect. I know a lot of you are probably scoffing at my poor work, but it's my boat, not yours. I aim for a different target, maybe. Practical. But it's a lot better than it was, and we fixed the voids in the deck that were letting a little bit of water into the interior. And life is generally a little bit better on Temptress. I own enough of these lead blocks to basically do 2 repairs a day. And when I'm really going at it, and honestly that's been a while, I will replace a section and replace another section, and then by the evening the glue will have dried enough I can take the lead up, and then I can maybe do a couple more in the evening. I don't want to work midday because in the tropics it's just really hot. In fact, it's already getting rather warm. It's about 8 o'clock. I do think I'm going to put a little more lead here. This seems like this could benefit from a little more pressure, but that's it. Well, hope you found that interesting. Just me working on something you have to work on, but if you have a boat with teak decks, this might be something someday you have to consider. If you're thinking of buying a boat with teak decks and the decks maybe aren't perfect, I'm hoping maybe you say, well, I know it's a big job, but it can be done. And this is how you do it. Bye from Clark on Temptress.